sabrosura pa' ti que.
Hello, everyone. This is Pam, the Café con Pam, the bilingual podcast that features Latine and people of the global majority who break barriers, change lives, and make the world a better place. Welcome to episode 358 of Café con Pam. Today, we have a conversation, you and me, nada más, just you and me. And the topic of exploration that we are going to cover is pretty much inevitable. It's really a theme central to all of our lives. Change. But we're not just talking about any change. We are exploring it through the lens of something deeply personal, actually. My experience with my recent move and what I call the Aida table. And this is a piece of furniture that has shared lots of memories and emotions for the last decade. Primero, let me tell you why this table is special. The Aida table is, primero se llama así because it was a gift from my friend Aida. And Aida has been in a couple of episodes actually recently, and she's a dear friend of mine. She is one of those people that I know I can call at any moment, and doesn't matter how much time has gone by. O sea, vamos a estar como si nada. ¿Ya regresó Thor? No. Thor is outside. And so when I moved to this apartment, I moved in with a roommate. She ended up moving out. And when she moved out, she took the table. And so I was talking to Aida and I was like, I need a table. And she was like, yeah, let me go through my house. And I think we have a table that we don't use. And she even brought it to my apartment. This is a really heavy farm table. And it's been at my apartment or at the old apartment ever since. So it was like, I think it was 3 years into me living there. And I lived there for, a long time. So at least I've had this table for 8 years. And so when I got the table, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a farm table. It's old. I love it. If you know anything about me, and if not, you're about to find out, I love me some old furniture. I grew up in my grandmother's house who had furniture from the 50s and the 60s. And so I learned to really love the layers and the weathering and everything that comes with old furniture. And I often think about the history and all the things that this pieces of wood many times have lived, and all the nostalgia really that comes from owning old things. So this table became a companion in my urban apartment for at least 8 years. And it's been a silent witness to many, many significant moments of my life, including the birth of Café con Pam. On this table, I recorded and planned my first episodes. Recently, you may have heard, I moved. I moved out of my urban apartment and into a suburban house in San Diego. Of course, as I moved to my new house, this is an old table. It's been with me for a long time. And it came to the new house. And as it arrived at the new house, the first thing I thought when they placed it in the living room was, I need to restore it. It had so much wear and tear. I had attempted to paint it. It was rough. It was in rough shape, but I knew it had bones, as they say. So, as I chose to have this table be my first project in the new house, I realized that it was mirroring my own process of personal transformation. As I began to settle in this new space, a much bigger house with a yard, I realized that I, Pam, was also transforming. And I want to frame this episode using the transtheoretical model of behavior change. This was developed by James Prochaska and Carlos C. de Clemente in the 1980s. So also known the change stages model. And this model breaks down change into 5 stages. This model was developed when they were studying people that were trying to quit smoking. And so this model of change has been used in so many different ways. Later in time, a sixth stage was added. However, the 5 stages for certain instances are enough. Sometimes you may need the sixth one, which I'll briefly talk about the sixth one, but we'll use the original 5 stages of change. What I invite you to consider as you listen to me is to also reflect perhaps on a change that you may be going through. So let's begin. Stage number 1, pre-contemplation. Initially, I wasn't even thinking of changing the table. I also wasn't thinking of the change that I would have. I only thought I'm going to change addresses. That's it. And I didn't even think about that yet because I didn't know I was moving in the pre-contemplation stage. I was comfortable despite knowing deep down that I needed attention and that the table needed attention. My body craved something different. This urban apartment all of a sudden felt cramped. It felt tight. It almost felt like it was contracting me and I couldn't breathe in there anymore. And of course, this came after many additional changes in my life. My brother got his green card after finally waiting for 13 years. David decided to move to San Diego. And after the various changes that happened in my life, I realized the change that I needed was to move to a bigger place. 1, by necessity, and 2, also by choice. But I was still comfortable. The space was familiar. I knew everything and pretty much everyone in the neighborhood. I knew where to walk. I knew where the streetlights would turn on and at what time. It was familiar and it was easy. I didn't have to think about it. Stage number 2, contemplation. The move was inevitable. My brother came. He moved into my apartment because, as we do, we don't leave family to fend for themselves. So, of course, he got his green card, and I'm like, you're staying with me and my mom. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. So, as you may think about it, we were tight. And so this change was inevitable. It was time. And as I prepared to move, I really started to think about the actual changes that would happen, not just from I'm just changing my address, but I'm no longer going to hear airplanes. I'm not going to have to pause because there's an ambulance driving by or an airplane flying through. And so the contemplation phase was really interesting because I began a shedding process, though I didn't know when the move was going to happen because I was just pondering. We had made the decision and I began wondering, what would my new life in a new house with a yard would be like? As I was thinking this, I started looking at my furniture in my apartment and I decided what was coming and what was staying. And I looked at the table and I'm like, of course you are coming, but there's no way I'm going to have this table looking the way it is because it's a new casita. And the way that this table looked was really rough. So I knew I needed some love. And I prepared to tend to her just as I prepared to be ready for this move. Stage number 3, preparation. Once we found the house, we moved. That was a whole thing. I had to let go. I gave myself permission to pack for a few days. I packed in 2 weeks, actually, and I procrastinated on my bathroom, which, I don't know, that's might be worth exploring at some other point. But as I was in the new place, I didn't unpack immediately, but I set the furniture where I knew the furniture was going to go. Of course, I looked at the AIDA table and I was like, okay, you need to look like you belong in this house. And this new house, I mean, it had been freshly painted. It had a different vibe. It's just a different space. And so I gathered the tools and the materials that I needed for the restoration. And at the same time, I was paralleling my own preparations for my own life that could accommodate bigger dreams and broader possibilities. And while I was prepping to work on the table, I also realized I didn't have everything. And also, I didn't know everything I needed to make the process a success. I was learning as I went with this table. And as I reflect back into who I am becoming in this new space, I also don't have all the tools. And I also don't know everything. But I'm learning as I go. And I think part of the preparation stage is to also give yourself permission to not know and to not have all the answers and to still choose to put one step in front of the other. And I was stuck in this table so many times because the paint was stubborn and I didn't know I was going to need more of this and mineral spirits and all these things that I had to learn as I went. But I gave myself permission to be open to learning. Stage number 4, action. Stage number 4, action is, I think, where the majority of people think is the first step of change. So this is where I pause and I kind of break the fourth dimension and I tell you, if you're going through change and your expectation is that immediately you're going to take action, give yourself the space to know that there are 3 steps before that, before you are even ready to do anything that would result in change. First, you have to do a quick recap, you have to pre-contemplate. So you have to get like a seed planted. Then you have to contemplate. That's when you realize something is happening, something has to happen, but we're not quite ready to make it happen. Then you prepare. Preparation is crucial because if I hadn't gathered my tools, I got some sanders, some sanding paper. I got some paint stripper. I got some gloves and like a mask, which that's when I realized, why did I throw away all my other masks? Because this is when I would have used them. So there were lots of learning lessons in the preparation piece. So back to stage number 4, action. That's when the actual restoration began. It was tough. It tested me in so many ways. It required patience and effort, much like the steps I took to embrace my new environment and my new lifestyle. The legs of this table were the most stubborn. They were as if they didn't want to let go of the prior identity. It's almost like I stripped them 3 times, 2 or 3 times, and they were still like, no, but this is who we've been for the last 8 years. We're not ready to release this. And much like the urban citizen I was for a long time, ultimately I had to come to terms to accept that the white paint on the legs of this table will always have some sort of evidence that it was there because they were painted white for a long time, because this paint lived on these legs for a long time, because many layers were added to these legs and they lived there for a long time. And so it made me think as I was scraping the paint and sanding it and fighting with the wood to release the white paint, I realized, and it made me think of the various times I claimed to be a city girl and the many times this apartment cared for me when I needed support. How many times I walked home because I was so close to downtown. How many times I looked out the window and got to witness, my neighbors fighting and all the different experiences I lived in that old place. And that's when I realized part of the action phase, once you're ready to take action, it's important that in order for us to take that step forward, we need to release, because that release is one that will free some of that weight. that's holding us back. I had to let go of that version of me who started with the dream of this podcast, who in a way still believed that this podcast was tiny. And I had to give myself permission to let that go, to release, to say thank you to that version of me who once believed that nobody would listen. And with that release, I felt the expansion. I felt the desire in my body. I felt my ability to now flow more because I'm choosing to trust the process. Stage number 5 is maintenance. So maintenance is knowing how to maintain the new change. So in my case, the maintenance piece comes with remembering where this table once was, what it looked like at some point. It was so rough. And also where the oldest version of me, the older version of me was, and leaving her there. I don't have to go back to her. I can honor that version of me and say, that's where you belong in that time. And maintaining the new version of me to last and continue onward. The lesson that the table restoration gave me was that sometimes we approach change with expectations. And when we learn to embrace the beautiful, unexpected shifts that come from where we least expected, it really becomes more fun and much more layered, a much more layered adventure. But I'm still working on my own expansion. I have realized that with this new space, I get to increase my capacity to believe in what's possible. I have a yard, and I haven't had a yard in a long time. I also realized that this move was a choice, not a necessity. It was a necessity, but it was more of a choice than it's always been a necessity, and something that I had to honor a version of me when it felt uncomfortable. I did feel uncomfortable when I first got to the space and I was in my room and it felt so big and so spacious and I felt uncomfortable. And so I had to honor that version of me that felt uncomfortable, because when I explored the discomfort, I realized that the discomfort came from a new version of me stepping into a place of choice and possibility, whereas all my previous moves had been by necessity. And so to bring it back to phase 5, the maintenance for me is to continue to believe in the possibility and expansion. We'll touch on the termination stage. In this case, it doesn't apply because the stage number 6, which you could take it off or on, the stages of change. For some people, the termination stage is when you've fully integrated the change into my life, into your life. I believe the termination stage is not necessary in this case because it's maintenance, because I'm not fully releasing the old version of me. That old version of me will always continue to live, and I need to go back and nurture her. And I need to remind her that I now exist in a place of possibility and growth. She's not non-existent. She's just nurtured and supported. And so this is why for me, it's a continual journey without a definitive endpoint. It goes, it continues. So a quick recap: the stages of change. Number 1, pre-contemplation. 2, contemplation. 3, preparation. 4, action. And 5, maintenance. Those stages of change are what we usually go through as we decide something needs to shift. So as we explore these stages, not just in the context of a DIY project, but as a metaphor for personal growth and acceptance, I hope you kept up with it. I know sometimes I can get very philosophical, so thank you for staying here and for being here still. Prochaska and De Clemente said it best. Change is a process that unfolds over time, involving progress through a series of stages. I hope you unpack the stages as you heard me talk about sanding down the layers of our lives and stripping back the old and embracing the beautiful transformations that wait for us. Thank you, listeners. I hope this episode in some way helped you, maybe made you think a little bit. And the reason why I love this framework of change and I really enjoy referring back to it is because change is not linear, is because sometimes we stay in the contemplation phase for a long time. And that is part of change already happening. And I think it's important for us to give ourselves permission to accept that even us contemplating a little shift is already being in the process of changing. So if you feel stuck in some way, maybe think about you might not be quite in the action yet. You might be in 1, 2, or 3 of the stages before you get into the action. That was the episode. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to hear from you. If you want to screenshot and tag me on social media, share what is supportive or was supportive to you. If I mispronounce the names, I always do. But listeners, if this is your first episode at Café con Pam, this is not the usual. I do about 1 solo episode a month, but typically we are an interview-based podcast. So this is your first episode, I invite you to go and explore somebody else, another story, because that's where you'll get the actual essence of the show. And I would love to stay connected at Café con Pan Podcast on Instagram and Facebook, at Café con Pan Pod on TikTok, cafeconpam.com, where you can find the show notes for this episode and additional episodes that you may explore. You can also check out all of the ways that we can work together, including El Mercadito. We are not quite ready to announce it to the public, but it's a great place for small businesses to be on Café con Pam. You can drop your info so you can be the first to know when we release El Mercadito. I'm really excited. That's a project that I have had in mind for a long time. I briefly launched it in 2018 and then kind of like was confused about it. And so 2019, somewhere around there. And we are back to it. And, you know, my soft spot is with small businesses. And so my goal is always going to be to find ways to help us expand and believe in possibilities. And if I have a space for you to do so, why not offer it? All right, listeners, thank you so much for being here today. Y como siempre, stay shining.